All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Hack on the Hill 9. My name is James Wu, and this is my workshop on an introduction to React Native. So if you're not sure what that is, or you're not sure how to use it, hopefully you'll find some answers to those questions very shortly. All right, so let's get started. First off, here's the link to the slides and to our GitHub README. These slides may be helpful to follow along, and the README may be helpful if you're more curious about certain syntax or things that you might not instantly recall. So be sure to check both of those out. And yeah, I would really recommend looking over those. Okay, so a basic overview of what stuff we're going to be covering is, first we're going to talk about what is React Native. Then we're going to talk about how to set it up on our computers. What is JSX, which is the programming language used in React Native. We're going to talk about views, components, and style sheets, custom components, and then functionality. So I'm going to be working on a demo and showing you guys how to basically create a very basic app. And yeah, we're going to reference that as we go along. So I hope this will be of use. Some disclaimers, we're going to be going pretty fast. An understanding of JavaScript and HTML, while it's not required, it will help you a lot in understanding some of the funky syntax that I'm going to be using. So I would really recommend checking out the workshop on JavaScript, HTML, and CSS if you're unfamiliar with those already. But again, it's not required. When I first learned React Native, I did not know JavaScript, HTML, or CSS. So, you know, if you have no clue what any of those are, like, it is perfectly fine. Okay, so first off, what is React Native? Well, it's a cross-platform mobile development. And what the heck does that mean? Well, basically, you know, let's just, you know, take a step back and ignore certain parts of this. We're going to completely ignore the fact what is cross-platform. Don't worry about what cross-platform means. Just think of React Native as something we can use for mobile development. Very easy to develop apps on our phones. So there's a couple kinds of mobile development. The first one is native mobile development. Native apps are apps that are directly installed on our mobile devices. So what does this mean? Well, for iOS, for example, if you wanted to make an app for an iPhone, you might need to write that app in some languages called Swift or Objective-C. But if you wanted to write an app for Android, you would need to use Java and Kotlin. So the issue with this is if I, spent all this time coding an app for an iPhone and I wanted to have that app work on an Android phone, I would basically have to rewrite the entire app from scratch, which is, of course, a lot of work. So what cross-platform development does is it just builds apps across multiple platforms using one code base. So React Native is one example of this, but there's also other things such as Ionic, Flutter, and Xamarin. But what these things do is they basically allow you to write the code once and then deploy it everywhere. So you could write the code once and use it for your iPhone, but you would see the exact same app on your Android phone. So much more convenient. Now, React Native is this JavaScript tool for building native mobile apps. It is cross-platform, which basically means that the JavaScript code is translated into each particular platform's native code. So this basically means that the app will look the same on your iPhone and your Android. It is backed by Facebook, and there's a lot of community support for it, so it's pretty popular. And I linked, just a kind of an about page if you are more interested in looking into that. So a fat TLDR, which means too long, didn't read. It's just a summary. iOS and Android apps are made in different programming languages. So can we just learn one language across all platforms? Well, notice across all platforms. Ooh, cross-platform. Dab. Cross-platform. React Native is cross-platform. Oh, shoot. Well, React Native is this tool that allows us to do that. So basically, React Native, you can develop for iPhone and Android and whatever other phone you might have. So very cool, very nice. There's a bunch of popular apps using React Native, actually. I was pretty surprised when I first learned this. Some that might be instantly recognizable: Instagram, Facebook, Discord, but there's also other ones like Shopify, the Tesla app, Uber Eats, etc. So yeah, and in the README, I linked, a list of like all of these. So if you are interested in checking out the full list, then, feel free to do so. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the basic setup of this. So there's kind of a lot of things to install, but basically we're going to be using VS Code, Node.js, and Expo Go. So VS Code is our text editor. And also all of these are linked in the slides. So if you, go to the slides and like click these, then it'll just take you to where you can download them. VS Code is just our text editor. Node.js is sort of a development environment. So what it basically does is it lets us host a server that our app will be deployed on. So basically think of it as like you'll be able to simulate your app, or it lets us simulate our app. Also, download LTS for this, not current version. LTS is basically just what is the recommended version. It's what's most tested. So it is much like, I would just recommend using LTS. And then Expo Go is an app you would actually download on your physical phone on like the App Store or Google Play Store, unless you already have a simulator on your computer. That would just let you see your app on your phone, like on your phone itself, which is pretty cool. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using the simulator on my computer. I have a Mac. And if you have a Mac, there's this thing called Xcode, which comes with the simulator, which I, just happen to have installed. So I would, if you have a MacBook, I would recommend getting that. Unfortunately for Windows, as far as I'm aware, there's no easy simulator on your computer. So you'd probably have to download Expo Go like directly on your phone. But even if you're on a Mac, you can also download Expo Go to your phone and, look at it on your phone. So feel free to pause and get these installed. Okay, so now that hopefully you have all these, let's create our first React Native app. So first things first is we're going to open VS Code. So, I already have it opened up, but like, I guess you would just go to Visual Studio Code. VS Code, by the way, is abbreviation for Visual Studio Code. I don't know if I mentioned that, but like you would just open it and you would probably get something that looks similar to this. And what we're going to do is we're going to open the terminal. So there's a couple ways to do this. First thing is you can just click terminal and click new terminal, and it will pop up like this. Or you can press Control. So I am on a Mac. It's not Command, it's Control and tilde. And if you press that, then this will pop up. So very cool. And once we have our terminal open, what we're going to want to do is we're going to type either of these codes, depending on whether you have a Windows or a Mac. So since I had a Mac, I type, sudo npm i-g, all this like weird stuff. What this basically does is it just installs Expo. So it lets us like, put our code onto a server and like simulate it. But you only need to do this once. So unfortunately, I already did this. So like I can't really demonstrate it right now. I just provided a screenshot here of what it looked like at the time. And basically what it does is you will type this. It asks me for my password for my computer. So like if it asks you that, you would just type in your password. And then once you enter that, so you would like type your password, I guess, and press enter, then it will start loading this and it just installs all this stuff for you. It's really convenient. Yeah. Okay, and this is part 2, by the way. So now let's continue with this. What we're going to do is we're going to navigate to a folder on our computer we want to put this project in. So in this case, I'm going to go to File and then Open Folder. And I want to put this in my desktop. So I'm just going to click Desktop, open that. Oh, ignore this. I think this is all that code in the terminal is because I already was working on this prior. So my bad. So the terminal should be blank for you, most likely. And what we're going to do is we're going to type expo init name. And name is just, the name of whatever we call our project. So I'm going to type expo init, let's say duck app. And all this stuff pops up. And here's a kind of a screenshot of it like blown up for you. But it will provide us all these templates. And for the purposes of this, we're going to use the blank template. Whoops. But if you wanted to look into these others, you can navigate through them just by pressing your arrow keys. So I'm just pressing the up and down arrow key. And then to actually select it, you press enter. So I just want a blank template. So I'm just going to press enter on blank. And then it's going to go ahead and install all of these files for me. Yeah, and once all these stuff is installed, we'll be able to start working on our app. Okay, so once all this stuff is installed, we should be able to type expo start into our terminal, which would actually, start up the app and run all the code. So this says your project is ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate to where this project is. So I'm going to go to File, click Open Folder, and I'm going to, this was on my desktop. So you can see, what's it called? React Native has created like this folder for me that says Duck App because that's what I want it to be named. And I'm just going to open this. Okay, and now that we have this, I'm going to go to our terminal again and just type expo start. And you can see this big QR code pops up. So if I was using Expo Go on my phone, I would scan that and it would let me simulate it on my phone. But I'm just going to press I right here to open the iOS simulator. And what this does is it will automatically launch the simulator on my computer. So you can see right here, it just popped up. Okay. And just like that, we've created, our first app. It is very bare bones. It's just the default code, but it is our first app. And so, hooray, we're making progress. But now we want to actually fill this with things. We want to be able to customize it and make it look like how we want it to look. So first thing to understand is what programming language React Native uses. And it's something called JSX. So if you're unfamiliar with both of these, that's okay. But JavaScript is basically a programming language and XML is a markup language. It's very, very similar to HTML if you're familiar with what HTML is. But basically what that does is it tells browsers how to format information. So JSX is like a mashup of both of those. And it basically just lets us write user interface components directly with JavaScript. And it does this by storing markup code, which again is that stuff that formats the screen. But it stores that code into variables and then just directly writes it into JavaScript. So, some examples of the syntax here is we have a view and you can notice that it kind of opens with this view, but it ends with this view right here, which is signified by this slash in front of the view. And it's kind of like that for every single thing inside this app. So we have text, which indicates there's a text thing, and then it's ended by this slash text thing. And I'm just gonna delete this for now. It's not really important. It's just this auto thing that is generated. So it's just a status bar. And I'm going to save my program by pressing Command S. So that would be Control S, I believe, if you're working on a Windows. But if we were to change things on this, we could see our changes instantly just by saving the file. So you don't need to understand how I'm doing this yet. But if I were to put this text as hello, hackers, welcome to HOTH 9, for example, and I just saved it. So again, I'm saving it by pressing Command S or Control S if you were on a Windows, then you can see the text here changes. Okay. So to understand better what's going on in this code, we need to understand what components are. And basically, components are just basic app elements that are provided to us. So looking at this tweet here from Donald Trump, the infamous Fifi chat or tweet, you can notice that this is made up of a lot of components. So this image of his face, that is an image component. All of these, wherever you see text, these numbers even, those are all text components. All of these little icons here, those are also image components. And then we even have things such as like, the reply button, the retweet button, the like button. Those are all buttons, which are components. And then even this, like this little box where we can click to, tweet your reply, that's a text input component. So components are basically just stuff that make up the user interface of what we're looking at. So, every single element you can see here, that is a component. And there's far more beyond what I've listed here. There's, I'm sure there's enough components that you could definitely find something that you're somewhat looking for to make your app. So that's just one Google search away. Okay, but to begin with, I'm just gonna go over some meat and potatoes components or bread and butter components. Text and image, these are very important. They're pretty basic. So I'm just gonna quickly explain those. So text, as I've already sort of demonstrated here, is signified by this opening text and this ending text syntax. And just whatever you put in between, that's your text. So very cut and dry, like, my name is James. And if I save it, so remember, saving it is what updates the code or updates the simulator. So if I save this file, then the text changes. So it's very, very neat. An image component is slightly different. There's two different ways to get an image into our code. The first one is if we actually have the file on our computer, which is this first one. The second one is if we're using an image from online, just with a link. So I'm not going to demonstrate the second one, but it is just like, if we just had an image, a link to an image on the internet, and we just pasted it in here, that's the one, like that image would show up. So it's somewhat self-explanatory, I hope. But I will really quickly now show this first one. So for my app, let's say I want to use this image right here. Let me move this, and it's called Duck Stabby. It's just a little duck with a knife. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this image and just drag it into my folder here. So one way to do this is I can just drag it here and release it, or I could actually open the folder with that we're working in and drag it here. It would be the same thing. So I'm just going to drag it here, let go, and there's our image. And I'm going to put this into our assets folder. And this is more so just for organization. So we keep all of our images in one spot. Okay. So now let's change this text really quick. So I don't want it to say my name is James. James, let's say, duck. But if we wanted to put our image into here, what I would do is I would just type image, image, and I would do this slash right here and then a closing bracket. And this is because image is a self-closing component. So there's not really anything to put in between it. It's more so all done in this initial declaration. And what I'm going to do is type source equals and then 2 curly brackets and then require and I believe it's a colon here, or no, parentheses, and then 2 of these single quotes. And what I need to do now is I need to specify the file path of where my image is. So because the program needs to understand where are we going to get this image from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type /assets and then / again duckstabby.jpg. And what this is basically saying is it's saying we're going to go into our assets folder inside of this program, and we're going to look for the duckstabby.jpg image, which is right here. Now, one quick thing I'm going to do is right here in, well, I guess for the sake of demonstration, if I were to save this right now, you might think it looks all good. It should fit all the syntax. So if I saved it, it should show our image. But if I save it, ooh, runs into big errors. Why is that? Well, the reason is this thing called imports. I'm going to talk about that right now, actually. So imports. Remember how React Native is cross-platform? Well, this means that it uses certain bits of code from different places. And to use those things, you must import them. So sometimes React Native will automatically do that for us, but in this case, it has not. So what I need to do now is I'm basically going to put a comma here and then type image. And if I save it now, there's our image. But for a better explanation of what's like actually happening, this right here is what's called a library. And a library is just a bunch of code that someone somewhere has written in advance. So I guess like some dude probably just wrote this huge library called React Native. And in it, it has all these components like style sheet, text, view, image. And if I want to like, use those components, I don't want to rewrite like everything from scratch. So I just want to use what this dude has already written. So we're going to import and then whatever that component is from that library. So that's kind of a basic understanding of what's going on there. Okay, so now you might have heard me like toss it around a couple of times, or you might just have seen it, in this actual code. Like here's a view, but what is a view? Well, a view is basically a container that holds things. It's an invisible component, but it basically helps us format stuff on the screen. So for example, I have an image here and I have a text, and both of these are just sandwiched by this one view. This view, think of it just as an invisible container that is just holding all of these components inside of it. Well, yeah, for now, I'll just leave it at that. But something important to note is you can stack views inside of views. So like if I, this is one overarching view, right? But if I wanted to type view here, like this would be perfectly valid. And I could like type in text here and put like hello. And if I saved my program, then you would see like this other text pop up. This is kind of important for how we style components, which is something I'll talk about later. But for now, just understand that you can stack views inside of one another. So why is that important? Well, that has to do with all of this extra stuff you see surrounding our components, like this export default function app, and like this return. What does that even mean? Well, basically what this is saying is this is a function called app, and it shows everything that is on our app. And what's returned is what will actually show up on the screen. So something important to note is we can only return one component. And you might be wondering, like, how is that possible? Because, it seems like we have an image, we have a text, and we have a view. Like, aren't those three different things? Well, actually, it's not. Technically, what's happening here is we're returning this one view. And it just happens that this one view contains an image and it contains a text. So that's why it's important that we can kind of layer views inside of each other like this, because by doing that, it makes it so we can kind of fit in more organization stuff, and we can, format more components the way we want to. Okay, so now that we have all that, let's actually make our app pretty. We got some bare bones text, we got our image, but like, what if I want, this image to be the color green? Like, how can I do that? Okay, so the way we can do this is with something called style sheets. In React Native, a style sheet is the most common and easy way to format views. And it does this by putting all the formatting for a view under one style that you get to name. So what exactly does this mean? Well, like here's an example. So first, let's, this is a lot, so let's just break it down. First things first is let's look at what we already can understand. So in our app, we are going to have one text element, and it's going to say, guess what, chicken butt. And then we're going to have an image that is just, this duck stabby image. So you can see the bare bones things right here. But how did we get this border around everything? Well, that's what this thing called styles. And I believe over here, yeah, it already has this default container. And what's happening in here is basically this view, this top view, is being formatted with this style that's called container. And within this container, there's all these specific, I guess, bits of code that will specify how this thing should be formatted. So this container style is saying whatever I'm applied to, let's give it the background color of hashtag FFF, which in hex code just means white. We're going to align all these items to be centered, and we're going to justify all this content to be centered. And flex one just kind of means alignment with respect to, the edges of things. I'm not going to go super into like every single type of like formatting there is, because there's, hundreds, but these are some basic ones. And it's taking all this formatting and it's applying it to this overarching view. So everything inside of this view is going to have a background color, a default background color of white. It's going to be positioned in this particular way with respect to the corners of our phone. It's all going to be center aligned, and it's all going to be, justified, also centered. But I didn't want to like just leave it at that. So I made two more styles of my own. So this one's called the chicken butt style. And you can notice that in this one, I set the background color to be pink. I, had some other attributes here, like a border color of blue. Don't worry too much about all of these. If you're really curious, you can just look them up. Padding basically means like how much space is around it. But I basically wrote out all this formatting. And then if I go to my text here and I say style equals, and then curly bracket styles.chickenbuttstyle, what I'm saying is, hey, for this text component, go look at this style that is called chicken butt style and format all of my text component with that. So as a result, everything in this text component is going to have a blue border. It's going to have a pink background color. And yeah, and you can do the same thing with images. So I just made one really quick for, the image as well, which is just a red border more or less. Okay, so I blabbed quite a bit about what a style sheet is, but let's actually see it in progress. Oh wait, sorry, one really quick thing. So I already mentioned that you can have multiple styles in one style sheet, but you might have noticed I said here, this is how we use JSX in the code with curly braces. Well, basically, these curly braces are what we use to directly inject like JSX into our code. So right here, like everything with the weird like brackets, and all the components, all that stuff is sort of like HTML. It's not exactly the same, but it's kind of similar. In that it's just formatting the stuff on our screen. However, if I declare here all these styles, to be able to use these styles and directly apply them into these components, we're using JSX. Or we're using JavaScript, I should say. So these curly brackets are basically, enabling us to reach into this and just pull out that style and directly format our component. So notice how it's directly formatting a UI element. So that's kind of an example of JSX. And you'll notice that we use curly brackets for a lot of those, we use curly brackets for a lot of those similar things throughout this demo. Okay, so let's do something for our particular demo now. I'm going to make two more style sheets. And if I look away, it's just because I'm referencing some notes that I've already taken. But Basically, first thing, I'm going to make one style that's called duck output container. And you can name it, whatever you want. Like I can name it like any name, basically. I just chose duck output container because why not? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just like write all these formattings out for it. Now, I might be appearing to do this really fast, so you might be thinking like, dang, like this man really knows what he's doing, but not really. Basically, it takes a lot of experimentation to know exactly how to like format stuff on your app. So I had to kind of play around with this for a while before I found a format that I already liked. So, you will likely have to do something similar like that for your app. So like, don't expect to, instantly be like, oh, I immediately know what formatting I want to apply, because it's kind of hard to do that. And I'm just going to end this by putting a comma here outside of this curly bracket. And that just opens the door for us to put more styles. So, okay, so now that I have my style, even if I save my, my overall program, nothing changed. Oh, wait, hold up. Did I make a typo somewhere? Background is not, oh, whoops, this should be background color. Okay, there we go. Okay, so nothing changed. And why did nothing change, even though we, already specify what our style is? Well, the reason why nothing changed is because we didn't tell the program what to apply this style to. So let's say I want this style to be applied to my text here. So what I need to do is I need to do style equals and curly braces. So I'm using JSX to reach into this style right here that says duck output container. And I'm just going to directly say duck output container. And now if I were to save this, boom, we have a little box around it. And if, for example, if I change this color to green, then the color inside would change to green. But for now, I'm just going to keep it white. And instead, I'm going to change this style right here. So this one we already had. It's the default style that is applied to everything up here. It's this top level view. I'm just going to really quickly change this to a different hex code color, which was just like this nice shade of blue that I found online. So you can see, oh, now everything is blue. Like that's pretty neat. And the reason everything in the background is blue is because we made the background color for this container style blue, and this container style is being applied to this top level overarching view. So, it's just the background. Okay, and I'm going to add one more style here for our image because our image is looking like it needs some love. It's kind of bland. So I'm just going to name it duck image because it's just an easy descriptive name. And I'm just going to say border color. Let's make it black, and border width. Let's make it 5. Whoops. Okay, 5. And again, I'm going to put a comma right there. And now remember, we need to actually specify, what component is this style going to. So I wanted to go to this image component. So right here, I'm going to type style equals, and then my curly braces, styles dot duck image. And I believe, one moment. Okay, and I'm just gonna put a space here. And if I save it now, boom, our duck has a, what's it called? A black border. Yeah, and of course, this border color doesn't need to be black. If I change this to something like red, then the border would become red. But I'm just gonna keep it as black for now. Okay, and so you can play around on your own and just look at like whatever you think looks the best for you. So now we got, we kind of got something going. We figured out how to put components we want onto the screen, and we figured out how to format it. One really quick note, there are things called custom components. And what are they? Well, they're functions that you make that you can insert in multiple places later in your code. This lets you call one function to basically reference a whole bunch of code that might describe one big UI element instead of typing the same code over and over and over again. So at this point, I hope you're not like this goose and am, feeling very weirded out by this. So, hopefully this upcoming example of what a custom component might look like will clarify that. So here we have a sorry, a thread from Twitter again. And there's a great example of custom components at play here. So remember that custom components are useful to put multiple parts of the same user interface element onto the screen. What does that mean? Well, remember how each one of these are components. So this is an image component, text component, button components down here. Like that's a lot of components, and you probably would not want to rewrite it out over and over, right? Like you'd imagine writing 4 image components and like all of these different text components and all of these different button components, like it would get really repetitive really fast. So instead, something we can do is we could make a custom component that just contains that image component, these particular text components, and like these button components. And rather than, format all of these components like at once, we could just call 4 of those custom components in this case. So like one custom component here, another here, and then like one more down here. And we can just call that over and over. Now, I believe for this demo, I'm not going to go too much into showing custom components. That's mostly for time, and also because, this app is not going to end up being big enough to really necessitate custom components. But depending on the scale of your project, you may want to consider looking into that more. So I kind of just included this to give you an idea of that functionality being available to you. So let's make our app do something, because right now it's just like some text and an image. So one type of button is called touchable opacity. It's basically a button that will slightly change color when you touch it. And this is sort of what the syntax looks like. So that might look confusing right now, but I'm going to take us through it right now. So, so the first things first is I'm going to go into our view here. And let's just say, let's just put a touchable opacity here. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's say on press equals, and then bracket, curly bracket, because we're using JSX, and then these parentheses and this equal, and then like this kind of arrow looking thing. So don't worry too much about, this syntax, even though it may look kind of strange. Just understand that, this is basically saying what happens when we press this touchable opacity button. And for now, I'm just going to say console.log, button pressed. And in here, in between this touchable opacity, we're going to put what actually shows up on our screen. So, let's say I just want this to be some text for now that just says like duck, or I guess let's make it say like duck button. So if I save, oh wait, this might have an error because I didn't import. Yeah. Okay. So I believe I need to import up here touchable opacity. So that's just like something that you kind of need to get into the habit of doing. Okay, sorry about that. I figured out the issue basically before, or I think in Command Z. Yeah. So before, it said import touchable opacity from React Native Web, but in reality, it was just like, we're not using React Native Web there's React Native Web is a different library that also happens to have a component called touchable opacity, but we're using React Native. So touchable opacity should go here. And once I change that import here and saved it, then like, everything was okay. So really sorry about that, but I guess let me change this text really quick. So instead of duck, I'm going to make it say like, I'm a button. Okay, so you can wait. Oh, whoops. This one should say duck. This one should say I'm a button. Okay, but you can see that this touchable opacity component is basically showing up as this text that says I'm a button. And as a result, when we press this, you can see that it kind of changes color. And in our terminal here, it's saying button pressed every time we press it. And the reason why it's saying that is because the way we declared this, we're saying that here's this button, and every time you press it, print to the console button pressed. So every time we press this, then boom, there we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to declare one more touchable opacity component. So this, hopefully this one will, not be as scuffed as the last one I just did. So my bad about that again. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say on press and then my curly brackets and then parentheses and then like an arrow with a equal sign and a greater than sign. And then I'm just going to put in here console, whoops, should be inside of this. And I'm going to say console.log second button pressed. And let's make this touchable opacity say some text that says I'm button 2. So now we have a second button here. And if we press this, then you can say it says second button pressed down in our terminal over here, right? And if I press the first one again, it will say button pressed, just like normal. Okay. Now remember how earlier I mentioned that you can wrap views in this? Well, I'm going to show an example of that now, and I'm going to show why that's kind of important. So I'm going to put a view up here, and rather than, keeping this closing view, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it all the way at, whoops. I'm going to put it at the end of this. So, and I'm going to select all this and press tab just so we can kind of see this easier. So what's happening here? Well, basically we have this view, and inside this second view, which keep in mind is still inside this overarching view, we have these two touchable opacity components. So what can we do with this now? Well, remember that we can create styles for each type of view, right? So if I make this second view, and let's say I name it container shared. And again, I've kind of labbed all these beforehand. So what flex direction is it kind of like says the alignment of the stuff inside. There's a thing called align items. And like all of these, they have their own definitions. And if you're more curious about it, then you can definitely look it up. These are kind of just commonly used. So, okay, so I have this thing called container shared. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to put the components inside of the view to have a row, like it's going to put them side by side, because notice how right now our touchable opacity components are one on top of the other. Well, I want them to be side by side. So I'm going to go to this view that encompasses everything, and I'm going to set this style equal to styles, whoops, equal to styles dot container shared. And if I save that, you can see, boom, now it's kind of side by side, although it's kind of weird because there's not a space in between them. If I put a space here, then there you can go. Like these are two separate buttons. So now to distinguish each of these a little bit more, because it is kind of hard to tell when they're just text. Let's apply some styles to those as well. So I'm just going to have this one say, let's see. Let's make this one called duck container. And within this, I can say background color is yellow, so it maybe pops a little bit more. Border color. Again, I've already kind of tested these in advance, so I have an idea of what it will look like after I'm done. Items, center, justify content, center, padding 15. Okay, so now if I take this and let's say I format both of these touchable opacities with it. So I'm going to say touchable opacity style equal, and then our curly brackets, styles dot duck container, a space here. And I'm just going to copy this because I want them to be formatted the same for now. And I'm just gonna put that there. If I save that, then you can see now we got our two buttons, and it's very easy to tell which one is which. I'm just gonna rename this really quick. Let's make this called duck, and let's make this called not a duck, or I guess no more duck. So now we got our two buttons, and they're very unique. So now that we have that, it's all nice and good that we can press these and make the console print something. But what if we want to actually change something on the screen? Let's say, I have this box up here. It says duck right now, but I want it to say duck if I press duck, and I want it to say no more duck if I press no more duck. So how can I actually make that change appear on the screen? Well, right now, we have a button with no action. So what we can do to kind of accommodate this is something called use state. And use state is something in React Native that's called a hook. Basically, it lets us update the screen after the user interacts with stuff. And this is because when we call it, it re-renders the entire screen so that we can see new content that change from the user's actions. Okay, so this is the declaration for use state. And if you're looking at this for the first time, you might be wondering, like, what in the world is this? And it is very, I don't think it's very intuitive. For me, it was not, at least. I had to spend quite a bit of time on breaking it down. So I'm going to do that for you guys right now. And hopefully what's an easy to follow manner. Okay. So first thing, what is this? Well, this thing right here declares a new constant variable. And in this case, it's declaring an array. This right here, this variable that's called duck state, is the current state of whatever the element is. So if you had, for example, this setup and the user clicked the duck button, then the current state would be duck. But if the user clicked the no more duck button, this thing should change to say not a duck. So the current state would become not a duck. Okay, the second thing here is a function that we'll call later in the body of our code to change the current state. And lastly, this right here is just the initial value that we set. So this can be whatever you want. It can be a string, integer, or a Boolean. In this case, I want to start with the string that says duck. So that's why I put in quotes here, duck. Oh, I'm not sure why it keeps clicking. Okay, so how do we use that current state value? So, let's say we've defined our current state using the useState function, but how do we put it into our into our code? Well, remember the curly brackets. To treat our current state like a variable, we basically insert it with these curly brackets, and we would do something like this. So keeping in mind this demonstration, or I guess this declaration, I should say, remember that the current state is something called duck state. Well, we're going to put that duck state in between these curly brackets and in between, these text, like inside this text component. So as a result, this is telling the program, hey, this text component is basically going to be whatever duck state is. So for our, I believe, final demo, let's finish up this app and make it actually functional if we, press these buttons so they don't just use console logs. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to above our return statement actually. So I'm going to do this before anything else, and I'm just going to declare that use state. So I'm going to say constant, and then let's say duck state, and then set duck state. So keep in mind, or I guess recall, duck state is what our current state will be, and set duck state is a function that we'll reference to change duck state. And I'm just going to set that equal to let's say use state and then duck. Okay. And something important to remember is we are using this thing called use state. This is like, someone wrote the code for what use state means. So what does that mean? We basically need to import it. So it doesn't look like it's been auto imported. So I'm going to do that right now and say import use state. And this is from the library called React. So there we go. Oh, missing a semicolon. That's not good. Oh, this should not be a comment. This is a semicolon. My bad. All right, there we go. So now it's properly imported. We're all good to go. We're good to start using this. So now instead of saying, well, first thing, I'm going to change this text up here to say the current state. So I'm going to, I just press the curly bracket and it automatically puts into curly brackets what's highlighted. And I'm just going to say duck state. So now this text component is referencing this current value. So I believe if I save this, it says duck because, oh, let me get rid of this exclamation point. So it says duck because we're setting our initial state to say duck. But if I change this to like hello, I think, then, now it says hello. And that's because this is what the initial state is. So I'm just going to keep this as duck. And what I'm going to do is in our touchable opacities, rather than continue to use console log, what I'm going to say is set duck state. And I'm going to make say duck with, a period, or let's just duck. And for this one, instead of saying second button press, I'm going to make this say set duck state, not a duck. So now if I save this, if I press this one that says duck, this box should be duck. And if I press no more duck, ooh, it changes to say not a duck. So what's happening is we're pressing, let's say we press no more duck, right? So it's going to this touchable opacity component and it's saying on press. So when you press it, set the duck state to say not a duck. So set a duck state is this function up here, and it basically alters this current value. So this current value will instead have the value not a duck. And as a result, it now says the use state, or not use state, the text component will now say not a duck because we are changing that current value to say not a duck. Okay, so that is all for this workshop in terms of the demo. At least we made our first app. And there's still many things beyond this workshop that we didn't cover, and even within the stuff on this workshop you could go plenty more detail into each one. So if you are curious and want to look into some more things about React Native, I would recommend looking into things such as organization, navigation, component documentation, props, and so on and so forth. Because each one of those are like kind of its own thing. And again, there's plenty more, but I would start with these once you have a better understanding of everything that I've already covered within this workshop. And one last thing to leave you guys off with, a quick disclaimer for debugging, because by now, if you've been coding along, or just been listening, and even as you can see, while I was doing this workshop, I ran into like some bugs and stuff. Basically, you're going to make errors. There's going to be errors in your code at some point. So some common sources of headache is, check your syntax. So like, have you got your curly braces, your brackets, parentheses, etc. Just make sure all of your syntax is correct. Then make sure everything's been imported correctly. So embarrassingly, this was like the thing that caused the bug earlier in this workshop. But I just went through that process of like, first I was looking at all my syntax, and then I was making sure everything had been imported correctly. And that's when I noticed that it was importing the wrong touchable opacity. So, just be careful of stuff like that. From my experience, most of my errors so far have like been from these imports, just because I haven't fully made it a habit yet. And because I kind of already understand the logic of all these components and how they work together. So like, that's my like, I would say like biggest nuisance right now, but that could it might be something similar for you. So yeah, and make sure you're only returning one thing. Again, we've declared all these different components here, but at the end of the day, this is returning one gigantic view. And I'm sure you guys' projects will be very different from this. So you guys may be you may even have more components than the stuff I was talking about. So make sure that you're only returning one thing. And if all else fails, you can always turn to Google, or for this hackathon, or in general, you can always feel free to ask an ACM officer or or mentor, because we're always willing to help you guys. Okay, so with that, happy hacking. I hope you guys do well with your projects, and I hope this workshop at least taught you some new things about React Native, or perhaps refreshed you on things that you'd forgotten. All right, good luck, guys.